Now, I thought I was a workaholic, but then there's my next guest who is, shrouded. Just engulfed in so many great projects and has done so much work in a very illustrious career. She is one of the original show hosts of the world's first 24-hour-per-day sports talk radio station, WFAN AM and FM in New York City. She's also one of the original hosts of the Golf Channel. She's also the author of A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. I'm here with radio and television golf commentating phenomenon, Ann Liguori. Ann, thanks for being with us here on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I really do. I was really surprised to have you on because of all that you've done. Now, you also are president of your own company, Ann Liguori Productions. You are the owner of the Sports Innerview, INNER radio and cable series archives. And that features a collection of interviews that you have done, you continue to do with sports legends and entertainment stars. And let me talk about a little bit about that series and who you've talked to, because it's a who's who. It's Hall of Famers in their respects. Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Sam Snead, Hank Aaron, Julius Erving, Jim Brown, Gordie Howe, Billie Jean King, Wayne Gretzky, Charles Barkley, and Brett Favre. After the thousands of questions they might have been asked, Ann, this is my own question. Talk to me about your prep, and what do you hope to learn from each interview?
Well, gosh, that show, it started in 1989. My first guest was with the one and only Mickey Mantle, right at his restaurant, Mickey Mantle's restaurant on Central Park South. It's no longer there anymore, but that was a great first guest. And from there, the show aired every week for 17 years. And, I really pride myself on the fact that I was able to connect with so many legends in sports and entertainment, but, obviously focusing on sports legends. And, I just tried to, back then it was before the age of the internet and, just being able to Google somebody's name and find out everything about that person that you could. Back then I used to, obviously get all the newspapers I could get my hands on, and I kept files of every personality in sports that I wanted to interview or that I knew I was going to interview. And I had file folders galore and kept notes on everybody that I really wanted to talk to. And then, it was the old-fashioned way of doing research. Once I connected with a potential guest and booked the show and coordinated the show and all that, I just did as much homework as I could on that particular guest. But, it was pretty tedious back then just trying to do research on everybody because we didn't have the computer system and the instantaneous information like we do today. So just looking back, it was quite the process.
The support staff, did you have any particular resources in terms of if you had to reach to say biographers of these certain stars or, other, fellow athletes or what was it you had to do? I guess, were there any other kind of pre-interviews or other things you did to try to grab some notes, to try to get something out of did they get more content out of the interview that was just said, aside from what the press gave you?
Sure. I would read their biographies, autobiographies, any kind of, do a lot of work in the library, any kind of research. The old-fashioned kind of research, really just going to and read books and things written about that person, as much as I could read about that person. So I would try to know more about that person than almost the person knew about himself, right? Before sitting down with him or her. So, it was a lot of work, but I think obviously the art of a excellent interview is doing your research and then just asking great questions and then listening. I think listening is important. So I would react to what the person was saying, and then kind of take a break and a pause and let that person talk a little bit more. And that's when I really thought I would get the best material when my guest had a chance to kind of take a pause and maybe decide what direction they wanted the conversation to go.
Now, besides probably having to have a good strong comfort level, not to feel starstruck with some of these stars that for some people they would be just fandom would just overcome them if they got to meet somebody in person or get their autograph, God forbid. But now, are you ever thinking in the back of your mind what the fans of these stars, obviously, like you say, Mickey Mantle, and you have all these Yankees fans for years and years on, generations of fans. They're watching this show, and these fans are expecting you to ask certain questions to their sports idols, the kinds of takeaways they expect from a feature interview that you would conduct. I mean, did you ever try to think about, okay, the fans, you want to learn about this and they want to learn about that, and they don't want to just hear just some run-of-the-mill interview. I have to come with something more. Take me through what you would normally have to think about. That would have to be that one question that okay, I got him to say this.
Well, yeah, I mean, every personality is different. And, once I basically did thorough research on each guest, I then, kind of took a step back and thought, what do I really want to know about this person? And what do my viewers and listeners really want to know about this person? And what has never been revealed? I mean, what kind of conversations, can I get into that, obviously respecting each athlete, each personality, but, how can I get that person to share parts of themselves that perhaps they haven't said on another show? And that's basically the approach I took. I wanted every interview to be unique, and I wanted, the person to feel comfortable talking to me. I wasn't there to, exploit the person or embarrass the person. Basically the show's about their success stories, and each personality that I try to connect with is very inspirational. So, I wanted the takeaway to be both revealing and inspirational at the same time.
Now, one thing that's really fascinating about your career is the kind of autonomy that you've had, basically to steer your career where you wanted it to go, it feels like, from what I've read. Now, you're currently the golf and tennis correspondent for WFAN Radio, CBS Sports Radio. You broadcast from the Masters. You've been doing it over 20 years, I believe. You've done the PGA Championships, the U.S. Open Golf, U.S. Open Tennis Championships, the Open Championship, PGA Tour, LPGA, and the Ryder Cup. You've covered 6 Olympic Games. When you were asked about what do you enjoy most about your work, you said this, quote, covering a variety of sports, interviewing fascinating people, and I love to travel. I love the flexibility of being my own boss. I want to, end quote, I want to ask about having that full control of what you work on, which I think everybody ultimately would love to have when you have a career like what you're doing. How does it keep you motivated to keep such a busy schedule at this point in your career after all that you've done?
I just love being my own boss and making my own travel decisions, making my own choices of what I cover and who I interview. Nobody really tells me, what to do, which is, I guess I'm so used to being my own boss. I don't ever want to take that for granted, but I guess I'm just not a corporate kind of gal.
Me neither. I've been there.
Where I'd want to be sitting in an office from 9 to 5 somewhere. I mean, I'm working round the clock, doing what I love, and I just think that's the most important thing for people listening. Just pursue something that you're very passionate about. And whether you're independent and your own boss, or whether you're working, for somebody else or collaborating with somebody else, which I do on a number of projects, you just have to have a passion for what you do and pursue it. And a lot of times you don't pursue it, obviously, because there's a lot of money involved. You pursue, the project or your career because you love what you do. And that's basically what I've done. I mean, when I was just starting out in the 80s, women weren't given a lot of opportunities, in sports broadcasting.
Right.
And so I started producing shows and putting radio and TV shows together. But in order to afford to be able to be in the business, I had to bring in my own sponsors. And I basically taught myself how to do that. It's not easy, and a lot of people, don't do it and would not think about doing it. But that's basically how I started, because I had to.
But that's
years ago,
too, is the fact that that is one thing very important, is what you just said, is that you had to, when you had to go look for sponsors, you had to do your own advertising and marketing of your own brand. The idea is
everything,
right?
Everything A to Z.
You have to be, and I call it a Swiss Army knife when it comes to media now. You just can't be one thing that you do. There have to be multiple skill sets to whatever you're doing right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if you've done work behind the camera to get, setting or lighting, getting, whatever you're producing done just right, or having the good work. And, again, trying to go filter out the guests you want to bring on, the research you have to bring on. So much is there. You're not just sitting there behind a camera. You have so much going on behind the scenes. You've learned that early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times now in the business, you have to know, in front of the camera, behind the camera, you have to do a lot of different things. But, back then I took it a step further because I had to, get the show paid for. So I went out and sold the show I went out and acquired sponsors. I went on knocking down doors on Madison Avenue at a time, when the TV show started in 1989, when, advertising executives were not used to women hosting sports shows. And they certainly were not used to women, who were hosting shows to go out and bring in the sponsorship dollars for their shows. So, was I a trailblazer? Yes. I was just doing things that weren't really being done, but it was the only way I could come up with the finances to pay for the show and the production staff and these TV shows that were on for so many years. So, it was interesting, new ground and great opportunity. And I kind of taught myself how to do it, and I'm still doing it. Once
Right.
you become like independent and are used to kind of running that whole show from A to Z, I think, I enjoy that. And so, I continue to go out and bring in sponsors for my radio work and for my TV projects.
And when I think about it, it's been more than 40 years that we've seen the era, the advent of this female sportscaster, and to see the growth and the evolution of the opportunities been allowed to women in sports on television and radio. So you come along the lines, and I would put you in the same era as the first generation of female sportscasters. I think of Phyllis George, Jane Kennedy, Leslie Visser, Gail Gardner, Mary Carrillo. That's just a handful of names when I come right off the mind. Now you have the landscape has changed. And I'll look at some of the accomplishments. And honestly, when I look at the names I have here, they're great sportscasters, fantastic. Doris Burke, Pam Ward, Andrea Kramer, Hannah Storm, Beth Bones. They've all had the opportunity to do play-by-play for the NFL, NBA, and Division I NCAA, and have done exceptionally well, in my opinion. Talk to me about how you feel, your feelings about the opportunities, and how they have gradually increased, and how you see other women as like yourself getting those opportunities first and foremost, more opportunities than before.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, the landscape has changed. There's more opportunity out there. There's more channels. There's the internet. There's all kinds of platforms, radio stations, networks. I mean, there's a lot more out there, right, than there was when I first started. And it wasn't that long ago, but ESPN was in its infancy, and these regional sports cable networks were just kind of looking for programming, and there weren't a lot of niche channels. The Golf Channel started in the 90s, and the Tennis Channel, so all these niche channels, kind of came into being as well, which opened up the door for to hire more people. So, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these networks obviously are giving more and more women the opportunity. I like seeing, the women who go in there and can host their own shows and do play-by-play and really do significant work in sports broadcasting. But I also think owning your own programming is very important, and being in a position to hire. And I think it'd be great to see more women in sports broadcasting who are in those positions to hire. And, the fact that, I've always owned my own programming. The Sports Innerview show is something that, when I first started, I maintained the rights to every show that I ever done. And, that's an important concept as well. So I think, we still have room to improve as women in sports broadcasting. And, but I certainly have seen improvements since I started. I mean, in 1989, MSG Network told me they loved my work. They could come up with a time slot for my show every week, but they couldn't pay me. So, I mean, what do you do in a situation like that? Well, if you have a dream like I did, and you wanted to host a show and interview sports legends, then I went out and started bringing in my own sponsors. And it kind of forced me to do that, because that was the only way I was going to be able to pay for the series. So, Everybody has to start somewhere, right? Everybody has their own situation and their own challenges to overcome. And, I still think women have a long way to go, not only in our business, but in other businesses. But we certainly have made some progress, which is a good thing.
And a couple things to unpack from that. Diversity, inclusivity are very common right now with the culture of way people are watching their media and consuming anything, which that is understood, but it still comes down to the caveat for me that the people that should be in front of a camera and should be on, hosting programming or calling games is based on performance. And that's what I think is always rising to the cream of the crop, is those that are performing well, that are good at their job. And that's what's most important, is that it doesn't matter to me who's calling the game for me, as long as that person knows what they're doing, they're well aware of what their situation is, and they help make the experience of watching sports on television a better experience around. The other thing I got to mention is I can only imagine the importance of when you're able to go and control your own programming and own your own programming because of all the legends you talk to. I can imagine the Hall of Fames for the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. They probably, on a regular basis, if they need biographical content, they must come to you because you have interviews, you have pictures, descriptions that they can use. So obviously, that there's multiple ways of pipelines of monetizing that show. Just as a financial aspect, that must be great for what you're able to do. Having all that archive content, it's always going to have value over and over.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the main thoughts when I poured all my own money into producing the show and paying the production staff, obviously getting sponsors to come in. But I just thought, I should maintain the rights to these shows and, be able to license them forever.
Yeah.
They're so educational. I mean, how many people have over 500 half-hour one-on-one interviews with these legends? Many of these sports legends not around anymore. They're very educational. It's great educational programming. So there are ways to monetize it. I probably could do better in that department, but, because I'm so busy doing all my day-to-day work. But I am sitting on a treasure chest of archives, and, it's just incredible when I go back and listen to the interviews and watch the interviews. Yeah, I'm very impressed. I'm like, wow, those are really good. So, I'm proud of what I've been able to put together.
I would be. For who you talked to, it's legendary. I want to move on to another subject now. NBCSports.com recently wrote, quote, "The fallacy of sports and politics sleeping in different beds. They've always been linked, always will be locked in an embrace of varying comfort levels. Pretending otherwise is breeding ignorance of facts that pass before our eyes every day," quote unquote. So I'm talking about the stories like you see from Colin Kaepernick to Jamel Hill to the NBA China discussion. What do you think about the injection of politics into our sports and political correctness being brought to the forefront instead of just playing the game?
I'm against it. I really am. I don't think, athletes or entertainers should talk about politics. Right. I really don't. I don't think, I don't really care what their opinions are on politics. If it's a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster, stick to sports. Yeah. Stick to your opinion on a sports issue or a sports personality or, what's happening with that sports personality. But I'm really not interested in a sports broadcaster's or an athlete's opinion on politics or, something beyond their, the sports world. So I'm against that kind of thing. I don't care what they have to say about it.
No. And I was surprised at certain outlets because they think there was a way to monetize from it, I guess. So I think ESPN was the biggest culprit of it. They thought they could go that route. And I know that I believe it was John Skipper that came back to run programming, and he took that out. He's like, no, let's stick to sports. There's enough politics out there for everyone else to watch or look at on social media anyway. I mean, when I look at most recently the Deadspin.com website, that they fired their staff because they decided not to write about sports. And not originally, that site was made to write about sports. They decided to inject politics. And they're like, no. I mean, there's places to go for that. There are places to go ahead and consume that kind of content. If you want that, then it's always available somewhere else. That's the spectrum of programming we have. But to continue to infiltrate it in every different thing that we have is just not productive. I agree with you.
Not productive.
Yeah.
And who cares? I mean, there's
Right.
so many talking heads out there. It's just over the top, I think, even in politics. I mean, especially in politics, right? Each side just so fanatical. And it just seems like there's no reason anymore, right? On either side, it's so extreme.
No.
So
Yeah.
certainly there's enough talking heads, on TV in the political world. We certainly don't need our athletes and our sports personalities, be it athletes or broadcasters, to delve into that world. It's just, it's just something. There's a few people out there whose opinions I really respect.
Yeah.
And just those people should really focus and stay focused on their areas of expertise. That's how I feel about it.
I mean, because sports, the athletes are entertainers. Plus, if you're going to be having causes, you want to have things you want to support, I'll appreciate those that are actually activists, that are actually putting something, injecting what they're trying to do. That would give me a little more credence to hearing you. Maybe hear you if you have a point to say, but not the whole subject of the matter. And that's where I come from with that. Now,
I mean, I just recently watched my interview with Jim Brown, which was done in the 90s. And Jim and I have become friends. And he's been on my radio show and my TV shows many times through the years. And, Jim Brown is very opinionated and quite controversial. But, his whole movement his whole focus, at least in the 90s, was his American program and helping gang leaders learn life management skills. And certainly that had nothing to do with sports, but I respect that in an athlete. If they're in a position where they can influence other people in a positive way, that is something that I enjoy talking to personalities about, And so a lot of these personalities, yes, they do a lot of other things to try to inspire and try to support and help, the good of society and mankind. So that I'm very in favor of. So I'd love talking to athletes about the work they're doing to help people. But when it gets political and if it gets critical and if it gets, fanatical, then, I don't want to hear it.
Exactly. Let's talk about your work in radio. So you were the first woman to host a call-in sports show on what is ultimately the first 24-hour-a-day sports radio station in the world in New York City, WFAN. You hosted a five-hour weekly call-in sports show for it's 20 years. That's a 5-hour shift. That's a long time. You were in the same building. Oh, my God, this was the most fun. You were there with Mike and the Mad Dog, Mike Francesca, and you were John Sterling. Susan Waldman was in the same building, Michael Kay, and others. Now you're hosting a weekend golf show on WFAN. So you've been there over 25. Well, it's been 30 years the station's been on. Over 30 years, if I'm correct.
Right. The station, WFAN, started in 1989.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 1987. Gosh, my Sports Innerview show, my TV show started in 1989. Now, WFAN started in 1987, and I was the first woman to host a sports call-in show. I'll never forget it. It was July 4th, actually.
Wow.
And, my first interview was with Doc Gooden. He had just come out of Smithers rehab, of all things, and I knew because being a woman, I had to come up with just a very controversial, or not controversial, but just a very huge guest for my first show. And so I was able to get an exclusive interview with Doc Gooden, and I was the first one to get him when he came out of rehab. Everybody wanted to talk to him, and the Mets had just won the World Series in '86, the fall of '86. So, and the station started in July of '87. So I was able to do it. I kind of bypassed the PR director, and then once I got to Doc Gooden, there were all kinds of beat writers. We were at Shea Stadium. There were all kinds of Mets beat writers there who wanted to, stick their microphone in my interview. And so I had to basically politely ask Doc if he would go in a different room so I could do the interview without everybody else sticking their microphones, under his mouth. And so he followed me to, at the time it was the Jets locker room at Shea Stadium. Now, of course, it's Citi Field and only the Mets play there. But and he followed me in there, and we did. I had to basically tell him it was a taped interview. This was the week before the station started, so I had to basically tell him what FAN was going to be.
Oh my God!
And he didn't even know about it. And so I taped the interview, and it was July 4th, and yes, the Hey Liguori What's the Story show started off with a bang on July 4th and kept airing for 26 straight years every week. So it was it started being Saturday mornings, then I went to 5-6 hours on the overnights and the weekends. And then the last couple of years I did the show, it was Sunday nights from 10 to 1. So it was once a week and just really great. I liked talking about issues in sports more than anything and taking phone calls. And really had a lot of fun all those years doing that show.
Totally. So Dwight Gooden actually knew about the WFAN first came on. And honestly, I was a Braves fan in the late 80s. And I'll tell you, I was always very jealous of the Mets, and Darryl Strawberry and just and win the World Series. And I mean, come on, there was just a lot of fun there. It was
a great team. I mean, Gary Carter, Howard Johnson, Davey Johnson, the manager, Doc, Dwight. It was It was just a lot of fun. Those guys, Gary Carter, they were really hardworking guys, blood and guts, and they managed to win that World Series in '86, which was wonderful. So, the station started right after that. So there was a lot of attention.
Right, and the best part was all the sports teams were really good at the time. Knicks were going hot. The Rangers were doing well. You had a lot of good sports to talk about, so people were really excited. People were very excited, and of course, New York. There's always, Yankees, Mets, Jets, Giants, Rangers, Islanders, Devils. There's so many pro sports to talk about. So there, we all. And then I throw in golf and tennis. Cover the U.S. Open tennis all these years, every year. Yeah. And there's always stuff to talk about. I always like getting into sports issues too. I mean, talking about trading guys and who's pitching tonight and. Those topics kind of were okay, but you don't want to keep talking over and over about those topics. But sports issues were great. I would get experts on to talk about head injuries in sports or, the drug issue in sports or, every week we'd come up with different topics that were, hopefully it was intelligent programming. And I'd get experts to come on and then we'd take calls and I'd have everybody on from Jim Brown to Kevin Rooney when Mike Tyson got knocked out by Buster Douglas in Tokyo. I had Kevin Rooney on as my guest. And he was watching. He had just been fired by Tyson. Right. And he was livid that, he had been fired, that he wasn't in Tokyo in the corner to help to help Mike Tyson, who had been with for so many years. And watching on the TV, Mike Tyson getting knocked out for the first time in his career. He was on my show just going crazy when he was watching that. So, through the years, I'd had incredible guests. Gene Shepard from the Christmas Story fame, narrator and writer. He came he was a recluse, and I got him on the show. He came on my show, and everybody was just so delighted to hear the great Gene Shepard talk a little baseball. He's a huge baseball fan. So, we had a lot of fun guests during that run. I remember Gene Shepard was a fellow radio host. He worked overnights, and you knew that you were listening to his show because he made sure everybody at their front doorstep put their light on. Is that right? WOR. Remember those days? It was before my time, I have to say, because I grew up in Ohio. I remember I read the story about it. I was like, that's so cool. That's radio back in those days. And that's right. Because one of them talk about the celebrities you've talked to, the other ones you've talked to besides Gene Shepard. I want to ask about, because now sports radio has gotten, because 66 and, the WFAN has gone through a lot of different changes of the ownership. Now you have the ESPN radio being involved, and you have all these other sports radio outlets that are over the place. And most markets, they probably have 3 or 4 sports radio stations in it. Do you think it's a little bit bloated at this point? Do you think there's too much? And do you feel like it still has a good, it's obviously the popular format for radio to go to these days, but do you feel like there's a little too much? It's a little bit overkill these days. I think there's oversaturation in everything, whether it's sports radio or whether it's, political shows on TV. Every cable channel has all these, as I say, talking heads talking politics. Mm-hmm. I love the days when there were actually fewer channels and you could go to, an ESPN or you could go, to the network and catch all your sports. I just think that, it's totally changed the media, all this consolidation. There's newspapers, journalists are losing
their clout and their jobs. There's so much out there now that people are making less money. They're, they don't want to pay. They want to hire young people and not pay veterans and experienced journalists and personalities. So the business has totally changed in that way. So yeah, I just think it just became, there's too many niche channels and it's become devalued, unfortunately.
Yeah. And when it comes to radio, Lee Abrams actually wrote out a Facebook post, most recently, the radio consultant that did a lot of work in the late 70s, early 80s with radio stations, music radio. But I think he's talked about the deregulation and the issues that we have where character and personality have been so much stripped from what you have right now today in radio, because people don't realize that's not the way to go and compete with digital, that you can still win, but you have to have content and you have to have people that deliver the content well. So you need experts and veterans that have good character. They have personalities. They are entertaining. But even the young entertainers now will not go to radio as an outlet. They don't want to do that. But like I said, at your station, the WFAN, again, Mike and the Mad Dog, those guys barking at each other all day long. John Sterling, who was one of my favorite baseball announcers with Susan Wellman, they're great doing Yankees baseball. Talk to me about, you had a zoo of characters in that building, and you got to work with them each and every week.
Well, yeah, they're not really, obviously physically not in the building. Susan was the first person on FAN. She started as an update anchor. Right. And so she was the first voice on the Wednesday, July 1st, 1987, when the station started. 2020 and then, she held different positions and then became, the Yankees announcer. And CBS had the Yankees for many, many years. And FAN got the rights to the Yankees a number of years ago. So so officially, she's just, she's back on our station. Mike and the Mad Dog were there, not even at the beginning. They weren't originals, but they came on about 2 years into the station's history. And it was just an interesting contrast of personalities and mix. And that was a special show, no doubt. So through the years,
you hear about these, like where I am in Florida, we would hear about it because, number one, before the Marlins came into baseball here, we had the Yankees. We would have the Yankees, the Cubs, and the Mets on the weekends. We would get to watch their games and in some cases hear the games as well. So I got to hear about John and he would call it the Yankees win kind of deal. And also had friends from New York who would always talk about that. Or they talk about Mike and the Mad Dog. Oh, you guys don't have it like we have it up there. Mike and the Mad Dog and all this thing. So it was really imagine if it would have been online and people could have heard it back then. It would have been amazing.
Right. Well, there was a lot of special, FAN, we were the first. So, it produced through the years just very special programming. Don Imus in the morning. Yes. That was a great show. Pete Franklin was the original afternoon drive guy. Remember Pete Franklin? He came out of my hometown, Cleveland, Ohio. So through the years, it really, basically focused on incredible personalities, sports experts who just know how to talk to New Yorkers for sure. Yeah. And, at a time, there's a lot of clutter now on the airways. So that at the time, for many, many years, you could pick up the signal, 660 AM, up and down the eastern seaboard, as far south as probably Miami, and as far north as Canada. That's changed a little bit now.
No, totally.
But, it's just still, to this day, it's a very powerful vehicle. I have a show that's starting on, it's going to be called Talking Golf. So I'm going to be doing a 13-week Sunday morning show on golf, which is one of my favorite sports. And that's going to start on April 5th through June 28th. And then, I'll continue to cover the Masters and the U.S. Open golf and PGA Championship and the U.S. Open tennis. So I'm looking forward to continuing on with FAN and with CBS Sports Radio Network.
Absolutely. I'm sure you probably have a couple of visits to South Florida because of all the events that go on over here. Because I'll tell you, golf down here where we're at is everything.
I know. I love Florida. I spend a lot of time in Florida in the winter. I definitely will be at the Honda Classic. I go there every year. I go to the tournament in Tampa. the whole Florida swing, Bay Hill, Arnold Palmer Invitational. So I get to spend a lot of time in Florida, which is a good thing in the wintertime.
See, that's on your schedule. That's what's so smart, right? Everything's thought about.
That's
Everything's
right.
thought through. Now,
that's right.
Besides a remarkable run of sports, you've talked to some celebrities. And I mean, look, they're still very relevant today. Kevin Costner, Sylvester Stallone, Charles Schultz, the curator of the Peanuts cartoons. You were also one of the first celebrity, oh my God, first somebody on this program, first females in history to participate in the Bob Hope's Classic to play as a celebrity golfer. Really great stuff. Now, what I want to ask you is, from being an interviewer, what is the absolute one takeaway you would give aspiring broadcasters they should absolutely need to be able to do when they're preparing for any interview? This would be, even for me, I think it's very important to get that word out. What would you say that would be?
Well, I mean, I mentioned it earlier in our discussion, but one is to do as much research as you can about the person you're interviewing. And then during the interview, the art of listening. I just think a lot of times you'll see hosts on shows interrupting and not truly listening to what the guest has to say. Right. I just think listening is very important. And then, you can kind of respond and follow up with your follow-up questions based on what the guest is saying. So I really do feel that the art of a great interview is listening intensely and then reacting to, what your guest is saying and putting in the prep work. Obviously, for anything you do in life, you have to be prepared. So researching and preparation is key.
I'm just amazed by that. Now, now here's another question I have. This is always one thing that always is a pet peeve of mine. So many great radio talents have made the transition to television since the medium began. Many of the MCs and the hosts we see today, I feel like, on our screen lack the radio background. I try to think of people that that originally came from radio or have radio experience. I can think of Ryan Seacrest and Steve Harvey. I can't think of anybody else, really. I guess Dan Le Batard makes that point for being on ESPN, but really there's just not much out there. And I think those are the best MCs, are those that when you're working with, without much else to work off of, radio is where you break your bones. Because, that's one thing I also think works very well for you, is because you've had all that radio experience, because it's not just the aesthetics of what you have on screen, is that it's the words you say, how you present yourself, being able to keep people, for yourself, to try to keep people engaged for 5 hours when they could be getting in and out of the car all day long on a weekend.
Right. It's ultimately the toughest format because you're on live in the number one market, New York.
Right. And
you're taking calls from all sorts of people out there, with only a 6 or 7 second delay button. So, and I'm, as you say, on 5-6 hours a week. Some people are on 5-6 hours a day, which is crazy. That's a lot of work. But yeah, I think radio, the talk format in radio is the best preparation for any broadcaster, for anything that they want to do. When you do sports on television, as an anchor, you're reading off a teleprompter, right? Hopefully you're writing it yourself and you're reading it off a teleprompter, but it's only for a few minutes, right? To actually host a show on radio and interview people for 5 or 6 hours at a time, that's very challenging. And I think if you can do that well, you can basically do anything. So to your point, it's a great, it's a great format to really, get to a point where you can host any kind of show. I can't think of anything that would be more difficult than hosting a call-in show. So
absolutely.
It's been a great format for me.
Right. And it's because then you're unscripted, it's ad-libbed. You're on the fly for the most part. With only so much help that you have among your producers, call screeners, what have you. You're up there, and it's like you have to maintain the airways for that amount of time with only the commercials to give you a little bit of a respite. But now my question is on this is also, because for me, radio, I always thought was a great testing ground. Look at all the game shows we always watched, as kids. They're okay from radio, all of them. And even people that hosted programming for what it was. What do you see as the end-all reason for the lack of radio stars moving up the way it should be? Because maybe it's a mixture of how the corporatization of radio has, the talent pool of radio stars that are worthy to make it onto the big screen and to get onto television and to make that transition are not there. And so celebrities.
Well, I'm sure it has a lot to do with opportunities too. I mean, for me, I was kind of doing both at the same time. Well, I started actually as a journalist, and then from there, I was writing for USA Today, covering sports in New York, and at the same time, I was a producer at ABC Radio Network, working with Howard Cosell and the sports talent at ABC Radio Network. And, basically I was trying to earn enough money to pay the rent, right? So I was freelancing and doing a variety of jobs. But by doing that variety, I was getting a lot of experience in print, radio, and then eventually I got into television. So to me, it was kind of putting it all together and trying to get as much experience in front of the camera and behind the camera so I could do anything in the business, right? But as I say, a lot of people have different approaches. You really have to go where the jobs are. And if you can get into radio, that's wonderful. Some people want to go right for television because, especially they come out of college and they think it's so glamorous that they want to be on TV. As we know, it's not always a glamorous business, right? But I think a lot of people, really kind of pursue television. Also, it pays more than radio for the most part, right? So they go where the jobs are that pay the most money if they're fortunate enough to get those kind of positions. So those are some of the reasons why perhaps more and more people kind of bypass radio and go right for television.
But I mean, my thing is, yes, I've heard the phrase radio is a cruel mistress because it's so fun to do, but how much money is there really in it to do it? So, but for me, I just feel like there's a point where with radio hosts that are out there, getting the opportunity to go forward, I wish there was just, I don't know. I mean, I didn't realize so much about your work or your background besides your radio work. I didn't realize you did USA Today and ABC Radio. And you did all that extra work because that's so much groundwork you did to work your way up there. You did not inherit.
Sure, I mean, you don't just start. You just don't start on air. I mean, a lot of people don't start in New York, and I started basically right out of college. I earned a fellowship with the International Radio and TV Society (IRTS), which brought me right to New York City, and I stayed here after the program ended. It was a great program. I highly recommend it for any students to apply for it. They pick between 20 and 30 graduates to come right to New York and learn from some of the giants in the industry. And that's how I learned. I came in under their fellowship program, but I stayed in New York. And it's a tough place to stay because it's the most expensive city really in the country, right? So, and I didn't have any friends or family here when I stayed. So, I was going through a tragedy of losing my brother. He was only 22 to leukemia as well. So, there were a lot of trying circumstances when I came to New York. But basically, I dove into work and started freelancing for a number of companies. And that gave me a lot of experience. As I said, I was at ABC Radio Sports Network as a producer, freelance producer, and I covered every team in New York. And while I was covering every team in New York, I was not only interviewing the athletes and getting to know the personalities, the teams and the players, but also seeing what the sponsorships in sports were all about. So that helped me when I began selling Sports Interview Show. So all these opportunities, all this experience comes into play with everything you do, right? So my advice to young people, don't worry if you're starting out as a production assistant. I mean, you're not going to start out as an on-air personality. You're not going to get a major show to host right off, right out of the gates, basically. There's different, you can turn every experience in the business into a worthwhile learning experience. And you put a number of those things together, and before you know it, you have a good resume on your hands. So it all, the more experience you can get in, sales and distribution and production and different areas of the business, the better if, to pursue on-air work, because you're just more familiar with what's going on and you'll be better overall. I'm
amazed you just blew my mind. First of all, you also have been working in the number one market this whole time.
I came up here right out of college and haven't left.
and I can, and also you just mentioned Howard Cosell. So that means if you worked in ABC Radio at the time I'm thinking of, that means you were around this. I mean, that was when ABC Radio was a monster, because you had WABC just coming off of that, and I remember they had the Super Radio project they started as well. And so I can imagine the people you probably worked around that area on top of that, because that was just so much good content.
Those were the days. Those were the days when there were only 5 or 6 major sports personalities, and Howard Cosell was one of them. So people shook in their shoes when he walked down the hallway. And I remember one of my first days on the job, he had done his commentary in the morning, and my shift had started at 11, so he was already out of the building. But his commentary was going to be repeated later in the afternoon, and he had said something inaccurate. He had said something wrong. I can't remember what it was because it was so long ago. This was in the probably mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And all I know is that I insisted on finding his home number from the engineer and calling him at home to get him to redo that one line so I could edit it so it would be 100% accurate, so that we could send it out again in the afternoon to all the hundreds of ABC affiliates, and it would be 100% good, right? So I find his phone number, but the engineer said, "There's no way you're going to call Howard at home." I said, "Yes, I am. It's my job as a producer to get this right." So my poor engineer, I can just see his face right now. He was just like, "Oh my God." They were so intimidated by the great Howard Cosell. But, being just a young freelance producer, I thought, that's the only way I couldn't think of it going out not perfect, right?
Right.
So we called him at home. I had no idea he was even going to be there, but, that iconic voice picked up the phone. And I said,
wow.
He said, "Hello." And I said, "Mr. Cosell, my name is Ann Liguori. I'm just starting here at ABC Radio Sports. You don't know me, but you said something wrong in your commentary that went out this morning. And can you redo that one line, and I'll edit it in, and it would be great." And there was this long pause. And you heard this just iconic, legendary voice. "Do you know who I am, young lady? This is Howard Cosell. I don't make mistakes." So now, what do I say after that? What's my comeback line, right?
Oh.
Literally, the engineer in the studio was about to fall out of his chair. He was just so scared. And I thought, well, I better come up with a good line, or I might not be working in the business ever again. So I just basically said that, "Mr. Cosell, normally you're flawless, but you did say this, and you meant to say that. So you want it to be perfect, right?" And you could just hear him, just kind of making all kinds of weird noises. And he finally redid it, and that was it. But do you know, he never forgot my name, and we always had great conversations after that. He respected me, so I earned his respect, and basically, stood up to him and made sure he got it right, which is what a producer's supposed to do, right?
That's go-getting.
I thought you'd enjoy my Howard Cosell story.
No, that was great. My God. But again, and I just remember, I've heard a lot of air checks at WABC back in the day where he'd have the sports commentary on and Dan Ingram would love to go ahead and rail against Howard Cosell and kind of pick on him on a regular basis. I thought that was hilarious how that would happen. So I can imagine, and Howard's not necessarily not like a lovable fuzzball. He's got some rough edges, but damn good broadcaster. I love him. I thought he was great.
He was amazing. It was great to watch him work because, he would do his commentary in 60 seconds and he wouldn't need a stopwatch. He would just know when to stop. He was such a great orator, being a former lawyer. He just had those incredible timing skills and speaking skills. So he was just a pleasure to watch, and certainly a character at that.
Now I got to ask you this: another great voice. Maybe you were in the same building with him. Did you ever get to rub shoulders with Paul Harvey?
No, I never knew Paul Harvey. Harvey was based in Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
But yeah. I did meet him, at various broadcasting dinners. And yeah, he was just an iconic voice for sure. He was a legend, and rightly so. He just was so, talk about timing and delivery. Few people did it better than Paul Harvey, that's for sure.
Oh, I miss his commentaries. It would be, honestly, that was one of those things where you'll never get another guy like him. Never, ever again.
Right. He had such a distinct style and personality, absolutely. And his writing was great. And, his points were just so thought out. And, everything about him was just perfection.
Well, Ann, I could talk to you about this all day. I want to take a minute and talk about your off-camera work, your projects, because, okay, there's so much here. Let me just try to compartmentalize this as much as I can. You're the author of the book, A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. You have created your own Hamptons Rope Collection jewelry line, which looks really great. And you can find it at DuneJewelry.com. And then you also, Bob Hope can have his Celebrity Golf Classics, which were great at the time. And now you also host your own golf classic each year in the Hamptons, supporting the Ann Liguori Foundation, a 501c3 public charity with a mission to raise funds and awareness for non-for-profits who work in the field of cancer prevention and cancer care. That's incredible work. Talk to me about, first of all, having the time to go and put all this together and organize it, and, what you decide to put yourself into in your off time.
Right. I know. It sounds like I do a lot of different things. Well, the book, A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game, is a compilation of interviews that I did from that show, Conversations with Ann Liguori, that aired on the Golf Channel. We didn't talk too much about that yet, but, I was also one of the original hosts on the Golf Channel with a weekly primetime show.
Right.
And, it took, 10 years for people to even know about the Golf Channel. In fact, Cablevision on Long Island didn't carry the Golf Channel in the early days. So I just thought the interviews were very interesting about the success stories of all these personalities who have a passion for golf, whether they were sports legends like Jim Brown or Sugar Ray Leonard or Johnny Bench or Pete Sampras, musicians like Amy Grant, Smokey Robinson, Vince Gill,
wow,
Celine Dion. I got people like Matthew McConaughey, Joe Pesci. It's just all different kinds. Kevin Costner, Stallone, all those personalities were booked for this primetime show that aired on the Golf Channel. So that's how the book got done. Then, since we talked about, I lost my brother to leukemia, and a year before that, I lost my dad to cancer. So I used to do an annual charity tournament for the American Cancer Society. And that grew into being able to support a number of other organizations that focus on cancer research, cancer prevention, and cancer care. And so about 10 years ago, I put my own foundation together, and we do just that. And so every June, I host an annual charity golf tournament at a prestigious golf course in the Hamptons. We have such great golf out here, as you know, on the east end of Long Island. And on June 25th next year, 2020, the tournament will be held at the Maidstone Club, which is just a beautiful, exclusive golf course in East Hampton. So I'm proud of that foundation and the work we've done to raise money and awareness for cancer prevention and cancer research. And that's, based on a great committee and my, great tournament coordinator, we've been able to put this event together now for 22 straight years. So I do things that I'm passionate about, and I really do believe in giving back too, because that's so important.
Again, that's the epitome of content creation. Really, you have made the most of everything, all the opportunities you've had, and I'm really just amazed at just the ambition that you have. You're really forward thinking, and Also, one thing is to be said about, again, you've taken a couple of risks in your career, from calling Howard Cosell to correct a mistake to working on WFAN, which could have very well not gone well with all said and done. I mean, I'm sure you would have definitely, landed somewhere else, but still, you worked in a lot of areas where, okay, we're going to try this ourselves. And again, finding sponsorship for your own sports interviews program, you've done a lot to really, buck the system, and really, you have been resilient in a lot of different ways, and that's incredible to be able to pull this off for as long as you have.
Pull it off as long as I have. Yeah, again, I mean, you have to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
I was an athlete growing up. I earned 16 letters in high school for sports every quarter, volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter, and then I doubled in track and playing number one on the boys tennis team when I was a senior in high school. So that taught me a lot. Being an athlete really taught me a lot. Obviously, it teaches you time management. It teaches you how to win, how to deal with losing, how to play with a team. You learn all kinds of, sports etiquette and leadership skills and skills that I still use today in the boardroom and in running my own company. So being an athlete was very important, and it just gave me the confidence, I think, particularly when I was, right out of college and embarking on this broadcasting career in the Big Apple, the number one market.
But wait a minute.
It just gave me a lot of confidence.
But what I didn't hear you say was you didn't let her in golf.
No, I did not learn golf until years later. In fact,
Wow.
I kind of had some fun playing golf as a kid here and there, but I wish I would have learned golf when I was younger, but I was so busy doing other sports.
Yeah.
Golf wasn't something, we took up when we were kids. It was more team sports, although tennis, definitely individual sport, but I love to play a lot of doubles in tennis.
Right.
But I didn't really take up golf until I was hosting this show on the Golf Channel and getting all kinds of invitations to play in these celebrity tournaments. And then I was normally the token chick at these events, the only woman back then, amongst all these guy golfers. So I knew I had to be good. I wanted to learn. So I basically started taking lessons every time. Like when I interviewed Sylvester Stallone at the Doral, I would take a lesson from Jim McClain, who was at the Learning Center there for many, many years.
Wow.
I'd interview all these incredible personalities that I would book myself to be on my show. And then I'd go to these venues to do the TV shows. And while I was there, get pointers from the pros who taught there, or the director of golf who ran the facility there. So you have to practice. So I would spend a lot of time hitting balls and just trying to get my game to a point where I could be very respectable playing in all these tournaments. And being an athlete, I think, helped. Golf is probably the most difficult sport to learn, no matter how good of an athlete you are.
Oh, I understand. I've tried.
You've tried. So I just became, so passionate about the game and almost addicted to the game. You'll hear, people who love the game so much, they just can't stop playing. So I interviewed a lot of people through the years, Alice Cooper, Lawrence Taylor, who, had serious addictions and changed their addictions from alcohol or drugs to golf.
Yeah, I still think it's amazing when Alice Cooper is on the links, and he's just he's a pretty avid golfer.
I know, the king of shock rock. Believe me, he's a wonderful guy. He's probably the person that's most surprised me of any people I've ever met, because he's so unlike his onstage persona. So, but yeah, I mean, golf I didn't take up until later in life, and it's turned out to be, my lifestyle now. So
also,
it's a great sport.
Have you used golf as a type of meeting when you try to work with clients or sponsors? Did you ever use golf in that respect?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Yes. It's a 4 or 5 hour day. So a lot of times you'll play with clients and you're not supposed to talk business while you're golfing. That's what the 19th hole is for.
Right.
But golf is a great vehicle for business. No doubt about it. Absolutely. I do a lot of public speaking, and that's one of the topics. And it's just a great sport. Plus, it takes you to some of the most gorgeous venues around the world. I've done TV shows in Ireland, Morocco, Scotland, everywhere, France, Spain, and we're filming on golf courses that are just one more breathtakingly beautiful than the next. So it's a great sport.
Awesome. Ann Liguori, again, and again, everybody can, I'm wanting to direct listeners, you can go and look for more information at ANLIGUORI.com, AnnLiguori.com. Ann, this has been so much fun. I'm so glad you came on and did my show. Thanks for making time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.